The United States and Cuba, so close yet worlds apart. Separated by a mere 90 miles of ocean, these two nations share a history marked by both cooperation and conflict. The relationship began with the echoes of the Monroe Doctrine, a declaration of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This doctrine, while intended to ward off European powers, cast a long shadow over Latin America, including the island nation of Cuba. The U.S. had long eyed Cuba with strategic interest. Its proximity to the mainland made it a tempting prize, a potential gateway to controlling the Caribbean and beyond. This interest manifested in various ways, from economic interventions to outright military interventions. The Spanish-American War of 1898 saw the U.S. intervene in Cuba's fight for independence from Spain. While the U.S. ultimately helped secure Cuban independence, it also established a pattern of interference in Cuban affairs. The Platt Amendment, a piece of legislation attached to a U.S. Army appropriations bill, granted the U.S. the right to intervene militarily in Cuba and to lease or buy lands for naval bases. This amendment, forced upon the newly independent Cuban government, solidified U.S. dominance over the island. It would remain a thorn in the side of Cuban-U.S. relations for decades. The U.S. did indeed establish a naval base at Guantanamo Bay, a testament to its enduring strategic interest in Cuba. This base, leased from Cuba in 1903, became a symbol of U.S. influence and a source of resentment for many Cubans. The U.S. also intervened militarily in Cuba on several occasions in the early 20th century, further fueling anti-American sentiment. The Cold War ushered in a new era of tension between the U.S. and Cuba. The Cuban Revolution of 1959, led by Fidel Castro, overthrew the U.S.-backed Batista regime. Castro's alignment with the Soviet Union, a direct challenge to U.S. hegemony in the region, transformed Cuba into a focal point of Cold War rivalry. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a botched attempt by the U.S. to overthrow Castro using Cuban exiles, only served to push Cuba further into the Soviet embrace. This event, a defining moment in U.S.-Cuba relations, highlighted the limitations of U.S. military power against a determined and well-supported adversary. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviet Union's placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba, a direct response to U.S. missiles in Turkey, created an unprecedented crisis. The standoff ended with a negotiated settlement, but the scars of this event would linger. The Cuban Missile Crisis solidified Cuba's strategic importance in the Cold War. The island, once viewed primarily through the lens of U.S. regional interests, became a pawn in a global chess game. The U.S. imposed a trade embargo on Cuba in 1960, an attempt to cripple the island's economy and weaken Castro's grip on power. This embargo, still in effect today, has had a devastating impact on the Cuban people. Despite decades of pressure and isolation, Cuba remained defiant. Fidel Castro, a charismatic and shrewd leader, navigated the treacherous waters of the Cold War with remarkable skill. He cultivated close ties with the Soviet Union and other communist allies, securing economic and military aid that allowed Cuba to withstand U.S. pressure. Cuba also became a symbol of resistance to U.S. imperialism, particularly in Latin America and Africa. Cuban doctors and soldiers were dispatched to assist revolutionary movements and provide humanitarian aid, earning Cuba goodwill and influence far beyond its shores. This internationalist outlook, coupled with Castro's defiance, made Cuba a beacon for those seeking an alternative to U.S. hegemony. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 dealt a severe blow to Cuba. Deprived of its main benefactor, the island plunged into an economic crisis known as the Special Period. Yet, Cuba persevered, adapting to the new geopolitical reality. Castro implemented economic reforms, attracted foreign investment, and sought new trading partners. Cuba's resilience in the face of adversity is a testament to its people's spirit and resourcefulness. It also reflects the deep-seated desire for self-determination that has defined Cuba's history. This determination to chart its own course, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is key to understanding why conquering Cuba has proven to be an elusive goal. The United States military is a force to be reckoned with. It possesses a global reach unmatched in human history, capable of projecting power to the farthest corners of the earth. Its arsenal is vast and technologically advanced, from nuclear submarines lurking in the depths to stealth bombers piercing the skies. The U.S. military operates on a doctrine of overwhelming force, designed to crush its enemies swiftly and decisively. This military might is built on a foundation of technological superiority, rigorous training, and a vast logistical network. The U.S. invests heavily in research and development, constantly seeking to maintain its edge in weaponry and intelligence gathering. Its soldiers are among the best trained in the world, drilled in the art of modern warfare. And its logistical capabilities are unparalleled, able to move troops and supplies across continents with remarkable speed and efficiency. However, this impressive military machine is not without its limitations. History has shown that even the most powerful militaries can be bogged down by determined adversaries, unfavorable terrain, and the unpredictable nature of war. The U.S. has learned this lesson time and again, from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq. The U.S. military excels in conventional warfare, where its technological superiority and firepower can be brought to bear against enemy armies and infrastructure. But it has often struggled in asymmetrical conflicts, facing guerrilla tactics, insurgencies, and enemies who blend seamlessly into the civilian population. In these scenarios, sheer military might is often not enough. The Vietnam War reminds us of the limits of military power. Despite firepower and troops, the U.S. couldn't overcome the determined North Vietnamese. Similarly, the Iraq War showed the challenges of prolonged occupations and counterinsurgency. Victory depends on more than weapons. It requires understanding terrain, culture, and clear objectives. While the U.S. military excels in conventional warfare, Cuba presents a unique challenge with its strategy of asymmetrical warfare. Relying on citizen militias and rough terrain, Cuba blurs the lines between civilian and combatant. Its geography, combined with national unity and resilience, makes Cuba a formidable opponent. Cuba, a dagger of land in the Caribbean, is a fortress of natural and human resilience. Its coastline, with inlets and mangroves, is a nightmare for invaders. The Sierra Maestra Mountains, cloaked in dense forests, are ideal for guerrilla warfare. Hidden bunkers and supply caches show Cuba's readiness for invasion. The tropical climate, with heat and rain, challenges both troops and equipment. But Cuba's greatest defense is its people, united in their will to protect their homeland. Cuba's proximity to the United States, just 90 miles across the Florida Straits, might seem like, an advantage for an invading force. Logistically, it allows for rapid deployment of troops and supplies, eliminating the need for long overseas journeys. But this proximity, well, it cuts both ways. It also makes the U.S. mainland vulnerable to Cuban counterstrikes, however asymmetric those might be. In today's world of long-range missiles and cyber warfare, geography just doesn't offer the same level of protection it once did. Even without a nuclear arsenal, Cuba possesses the capability to inflict significant damage on U.S. soil. Its Soviet-era missile systems, while outdated, could still target key infrastructure in Florida and along the Gulf Coast. And let's not forget its growing cyber warfare capabilities, which, through cooperation with nations like Russia and China, could potentially disrupt critical U.S. systems. Moreover, a U.S. invasion of Cuba would almost certainly trigger a wave of global condemnation. The optics of a superpower invading a much smaller neighbor, especially one with a history of resisting U.S. intervention, would be disastrous for America's image abroad. This could embolden anti-American sentiment, fuel instability in the region, and undermine U.S. diplomatic efforts worldwide. The Caribbean, far from being a calm American lake, is a region crisscrossed by competing interests. China, Russia, and other global players have made significant inroads here, investing in infrastructure projects, providing aid, and forging closer ties with Caribbean nations. A U.S. invasion of Cuba would be seen as a threat to these interests, potentially sparking a regional crisis with, honestly, global ramifications. Cuba, though geographically isolated, has built a network of allies united by shared ideologies or distrust of U.S. hegemony. Russia remains a key partner, providing military aid and conducting joint exercises. China, too, sees Cuba as a strategic foothold in the Caribbean and invests heavily in its infrastructure. Regional allies like Venezuela and Nicaragua amplify Cuba's voice on the global stage. These alliances complicate U.S. plans, making any conflict a potential regional crisis. Cuba's defiance has come at a steep cost, with the U.S. embargo crippling its economy for decades. Despite hardships, Cubans have shown resilience, innovating to survive and pushing for cautious reforms. Yet the embargo limits global integration, fuels brain drain, and deepens generational struggles. The Cuban government remains steadfast in its socialist stance, balancing revolution principles with economic reform. A U.S. invasion of Cuba would face global scrutiny, shaping narratives and alliances. Images of conflict and civilian casualties would fuel anti-American sentiment worldwide. The U.S., held to high standards, risks damaging its global standing and diplomatic ties. Such actions could erode trust, amplify criticism, and complicate relationships with allies. War's human and economic costs are immense, and Cuba would fiercely resist any invasion. Asymmetrical warfare would lead to significant casualties and erode U.S. public support. Beyond lives lost, the financial burden of war and rebuilding would strain the U.S. economy. A U.S. invasion of Cuba could destabilize the Caribbean, inflaming anti-American sentiment. It risks reviving perceptions of U.S. interventionism, eroding trust and diplomatic efforts. A destabilized Cuba could become a hub for crime, threatening regional and U.S. security. The U.S.-Cuba relationship is a complex history of cooperation, conflict, and mistrust. Past U.S. interventions and the embargo have left a legacy of resentment in Cuba. Despite this, moments of rapprochement show a path forward through dialogue and respect. Conquering Cuba isn't just about military might. It's about overcoming a resilient people. Cuba's geography and national pride make it a formidable opponent for any invader. History warns of the costs of underestimating a determined populace defending their homeland. U.S.-Cuba relations are marred by a history of intervention, embargoes, and Cold War tensions. For Cubans, the U.S. symbolizes hardship and a threat to sovereignty. This mistrust hinders cooperation and complicates efforts for genuine reconciliation. The world's geopolitical landscape has shifted, with power more diffuse and alliances fluid. Cuba navigates this new reality, deepening ties with China as a counterbalance to U.S. pressure. China's growing influence in Cuba reshapes the dynamics of U.S.-Cuba relations. Even with military victory, occupying Cuba would be a costly, insurmountable challenge. The U.S. would inherit a hostile population and a shattered nation, straining resources. Global condemnation and resistance from Cubans would make control and stability impossible. The U.S.-Cuba relationship, despite its troubled history, is not condemned to perpetual animosity. A different path forward is possible, one based on mutual respect and dialogue. This requires empathy, understanding, and a willingness to move beyond past grievances. Lifting the embargo would be a crucial step towards normalizing relations. Dialogue and cultural exchanges can foster trust and create a more collaborative future. Together, the United States and Cuba can chart a new course towards a brighter horizon.